Hello, and welcome to Romance Isn't Dead. Only His. That's it. That's our title. Ray, how you doing?
Not too bad. Wondering what I'm going to say about this book,
Well, let
but
me
then as
talk first, then you can tell me I'm
go for it.
wrong. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. So, by the time this recording comes out, it will be the end of January, beginning of February. Is that about right?
Yep, it will
Okay.
be.
All right. Cool. Well, anything that you want to chit chat about today or nah?
Mm, no, I can't think of anything. I mean, it's still winter, nearly my
Mm-hmm.
birthday. Another year older. Oh my God. I'm gonna progress to crying. This decade is the decade I turn 50, which is horrifying.
Let's just not talk about that right now. Let's just move on. It's
I know,
fine.
but it's nearly February and I can't help thinking about that and it's horrible. I know it sounds weird, but when you reach the midpoint, I'm one of these people that focuses on really random things. And I always try and, in the early part of the age decade, I switch the numbers around and think, oh, I might be able to pass for 34 when I was 43. And I might be able to pass for 24 if someone's blind. Um, but now I'm getting to the point where I'm going to be older when I switch the numbers round. It's so stupid, but it's one of those weird things you do when
Mm-hmm.
you're trying to focus on anything but what you're focused on.
Mm-hmm. I get it.
Unpleasant, unpleasant conversation at work, immediately start focusing on random stuff.
Right. And the last podcast, I was ranting about Star Wars. And I think that's one of the reasons why I was so upset by Star Wars. And I remain upset by Star Wars because I use Star Wars as my happy place, as my escape. And then they messed it up. So it was no longer my happy place, and it's no longer my happy place. Instead, it's a sad place, and I don't have happy places anymore. Not in my little fictional world. So it's very sad. So I need my happy endings, and I have learned valuable lessons about that. So anyway, the book today was actually, I would call it a classic romance. It's from actually 1991. Only His by Elizabeth Lowell. And Elizabeth Lowell is definitely a prolific author, and I have enjoyed her books in the past. So I didn't want to. We read it. This was another Western. We hadn't read a Western in a little bit, and I wanted to.
Although the last one was a do not ever read again.
It, it, it was painful. I wasn't going to necessarily bring that up. But anyway, I will read you the blurb.
Wasn't she another author that started out as a Harlequin writer?
Probably. A lot of our favorite romance authors did start there. So I think
Including
so.
Nora Roberts.
Yeah. So I absolutely no shade at Harlequin writers. And one of the things that Elizabeth Lowell did do at the end of the Kindle version of this book, she has an essay about the bias that romance authors face.
Yeah, I read that too.
And I found that powerful. And I was really glad to see it. Someone to stand up and say, stop it. I was really glad to see it. And because there is this derision for women in women's fiction that makes me a little crazy. And that's where I am. Like, it makes me a little angry. And yeah. Okay, so the plot, or the blurb. Escaping the ravages of the Civil War, a gently reared lady must leave behind everything she knows and trust her life and future to a dangerous gunfighter with a passion for vengeance. A team of apprised Arabian horses that is all Willow Moran has left, and Caleb Black is the only man who can help her reach her brother in the Colorado Rockies. But she fears the stranger who turns to avenge the wrongs of a treacherous man. For Caleb is as wild and unpredictable as the uncivilized land he loves. Yet, though she challenges him at every turn, the spirited Southern lady knows this proud, enigmatic loner is her destiny, and no matter what peril awaits, they must face it together, for Willow has become a fever in Caleb's blood, awakening a need so fierce he would defeat the devil himself to possess her. So, Ray did not like this book. It is from 1991, so this book is quite old. When I picked it, I didn't even look at that. I just knew that it was readily available on Kindle and it was not outrageously priced on Kindle. So I just kind of went for it. And
not only that, we actually discussed it ages ago because I've had it on my Kindle for probably 8 months, if not a little bit longer, because when we first talking about books, this one was one that we both looked at and you said, oh, we might actually do that later on, so may as well get it. It was really well priced over here at the time. I think it was something like £1.99 or something, really low priced. I know it's still relatively decently priced at £2, I want to say 69.
This one is here in the States. It is also on. It's like $3.49 or something. It's not
extreme.
Yeah, no, it's actually really reasonably priced, and you know what? There's nothing in that blurb to me that feels like false advertising.
No.
You know immediately that Caleb is a man bent on vengeance, and it's really clear that this is tearing him up, especially after he figures out, and it's about the halfway point, I want to say 52% or so, where he figures out that she is not what she has said she is. She has said that she's married to her brother, and he knows.
In some states that would be legal at the time, I'm sure.
Well, but she knows, or he knows that that's not true. He knows that Matt Reno. Oh, okay, let me back up. Caleb wants revenge on Reno, Matt Moran, because his sister got pregnant, had a baby, and they both died, which happened a lot in the 1800s, by the way. And so when he wanted to know who the father was, because he was going to go drag this guy back and make him marry her, right? Because that would have been what would have been done. And she lies, and she says it's Reno Matt Moran, when in fact it was not Reno at all. It was his partner, Marty something. And so, not given the information he had at his disposal, he wanted revenge for his sister's death and his niece's death. And so he was going to go after Reno, and he didn't have a way to find him. He was looking everywhere for him, high and low, and then he comes across this woman who is looking for Matt Moran, has a way to find him, and is saying that she's his wife. Well, he knows that that's not true. So his assumption is that she is his lover, that she is Reno's lover. And, of course, in the 1880s or 1860s, 70s, whenever this, it's probably 1860s, 1870s, when this is set, because it's in the wake of the Civil War, American Civil War.
Yep. We had one too.
Yeah. Okay. Well, in the wake of the American Civil War, there's a lot of movement in this country, people moving west because, it doesn't matter. There's a lot of movement. So, she is trying to find her brother, but she doesn't tell Caleb that it's her brother. She tells him it's her husband. And so he is making assumptions about her that turn out to be unwarranted, but she's sticking by this fiction that she is Matt Moran's wife. And
yeah, but she's sticking by those convictions because she knows that she'll be observed far less restrictively because she's married.
Mm-hmm. Right. And then at the very end of the novel, she actually tries to leave, and she says, I'll just start over as a widow. I won't be the first one, and I won't be the last. I'm not the first one, I'll be the last. And so, anyway, all of these things having been said, it takes a while. And he says it to her towards the end of the book, or at the end of the book, I snuck up on your blind side. You think you were the seduced, and I absolutely seduced you. And when he figures out that she is obviously not Matt Moran's lover or wife or anything like that, he does say, hey, you need to back away from me. No, no. Who is he to you? And she says, he's my brother. And he's like, aw, man, no, you are going to hate me, because he's a man who really feels like he's caught on like the forks of a dilemma, right? He feels like he needs to kill Matt for what happened to his sister, because that's what he believes. And he has no evidence to the contrary, for what it's worth. And then he's got this woman that he's in love with, and it's ironically the sister, and he doesn't want to leave Willow. He doesn't want to hurt her. And so, yeah, the novel resolves. They figure out that it's not Reno that's the problem. They get away from the gang. They kill a lot of them. And Caleb and Willow live happily ever after. And in case you were uncertain, Elizabeth Lowell writes this lovely epilogue that puts a gigantic southern-sized bow on top of it. Like a bow the size that I would put on my daughter's head for her newborn pictures. Very big. So, I kid you not. Huge bow.
Yeah, but then I do think that harks back to the fact I did a little bit of research, and she was a silhouette desire. Mm-hmm. Author. She wrote 11 books. She also writes suspense, romantic suspense, and she writes under another name as well, Anne Maxwell.
Yep. And A.E. Maxwell, I think, too. Yeah.
Yes. She's incredibly busy.
Yep.
However, she's done what a lot of romance authors have done in the past, and I wonder if this harks back to that whole essay that she wrote at the end of the book about acceptance as a romance author. And I can't help wondering if the reason so many authors like Julie Garwood, Judith McNaught even did it, and there are a lot of others, Nora Roberts, moving into a slightly different genre in order to be accepted. Mm-hmm. Which is quite sad.
This is, make no mistake about it, this doesn't look like it. Like, the cover of it doesn't look like it, but this is a bodice ripper.
Oh, yeah.
This is a bodice ripper. And you get into later Elizabeth Lowell's, once you get into the 21st century, and those are almost exclusively romantic suspense. But early Elizabeth Lowell, the 1990s Elizabeth Lowell, is 100% bodice rippers. And you know what? I love a bodice ripper. I am not being critical at all. I'm good with it. I like a bodice ripper. Rip the bodice. So
you see, this is the one thing that I find quite frustrating about reading romance. I remember when I first started doing it we're talking years and years ago, I would hide the book I was reading inside a textbook, inside a newspaper. Yep. I would fold the cover. I was horrific to my really, really my second-hand Mills and Boon, which is also Harlequin in the States. I'd actually fold them over so people couldn't see the cover of them. Absolutely. Not because I felt embarrassed, but because I felt like I'd be judged.
Exactly. You felt judged. Because people do not respect women and women's fiction, and that is going to send me on a tirade that I do not need to go on this podcast. So tell me why you didn't like Caleb Black.
I found him, I have no issue with alpha males. Seriously, when you read we get to my choice in a couple of weeks' time, you'll see I have zero issue with alpha males. What I did have a problem with was the fact that he was so insulting to her, and at the same time trying to get into her underwear. He was an anachronism, I suppose. The trout scene just made me cringe. And there were so many points where I wanted to physically hurt him, because he had suspicions that she was his fancy woman. Then he had suspicions because he knew she wasn't his wife. Yet there were so many elements of her that literally screamed naivety. Mm-hmm. And he continued on insulting her, even when she proved herself to be pretty capable. Mm-hmm. And he treated her abysmally. Yet even then, she fell in love with him, and the fact that she said it first made me want to bang my head against a wall, because all I could see was how badly he treated her. And I have to be honest, I started reading this after finishing a book that I struggled to review because I couldn't find one positive thing to say about it at all.
Okay.
Not even finding the writing good. So I think that it was partially coloured by the fact that I just read a really bad book. The writing in this is good. That I can say honestly, the writing in this was good, but I didn't like Caleb at all. And I kind of wanted her to get away and start again on her own, because she was incredibly strong-willed. She wasn't a gentle blossoming Southern belle who would faint at the first sight of anything. She stood her own ground. And I liked that. She was a strong character. And he treated her appallingly. And he thought she should be grateful.
I did not read it that way. Not that... Okay. I do not have as many negative feelings about this as you do. And first of all, let me say this. I didn't read a terrible book before I restarted this book. And I had restarted this book ages ago. And I picked up where I left off with that other read. And so I was about 40% into this book. So I am not reacting as immediately to the front half of this book as you are. Like, I'm reacting to the back half of this book. And the back half of this book is where you have the turn.
Yeah, right? Exactly. Whereas the front half of the book, you're seeing...
And one of the things I remember really... And part of this is... I live in horse country. There are horses everywhere. And I am livid with her as a heroine because she acts selfishly with regards to her horses. Like, she hires a mountain guide who says you do not need to bring these horses with you. And she does it anyway. Right? And she puts them at serious risk. And so I part of this is my concern for the horses, right? I'm like, are you serious? So yes, he is this brutal, difficult kind of man, and he does treat her really. You're right, but a lot of times some of the stuff he's trying to do is actually from his perspective, and really even eventually hers, for the better. Like trying to get her to change clothes. Right.
Oh yeah, I have no issue with any of that. It's the fact that he calls her a fancy lady.
Yeah.
And it's the insinuation.
And
when I was reading it,
She doesn't. Okay, so this is where the push-pull comes in. Right, because he shouldn't judge her that way, but in 1870 a man would. Right? In 1870, that is the prevailing morality. A man absolutely would be that way. And so, I for whatever reason, for me, this book was well written enough that when I read it, I could go back to, okay, this is a man from 1870. He is not going to fit in 2019 or 2020, but in 1870, this is who he would be. And Ray, you yourself have valued that.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And so I'm not saying he's not a jerk, because he clearly is.
Oh yeah.
But again, I'm reacting more to the back half of the book where they come across to me much more as equals.
You see, that's the thing. It was the fact that she is a strong character. She's portrayed as such. She is strong-willed, independent. She is actually able to cope with the hard terrain. She knows her own mind.
And he admires her for that.
But she almost cowers under his insults.
Is it because she knows she's lying?
Well, yeah, but at the same... She knows she's lying, so when he calls her a 5-letter word for easy woman, she doesn't say anything. She doesn't say, well, no, we're married. Mm-hmm. or anything else. She doesn't defend herself, and that frustrated me because it was almost as though it gave him the upper hand. And it just felt really wrong. There were also a few other things in there that I found quite weird, like Levi's. They mentioned Levi's several times, and because I wasn't clear on the actual timeline, all I could think was, were Levi's around then? So easily available?
Yeah.
I know that they didn't come out until like 1868 or something.
Yeah.
They started to be available. Yeah. But he called them Levi's without the uppercase L instead of calling them jeans.
Right, but he probably would have called them that. Kind of like people call aluminum foil Reynolds wrap.
They do what?
Okay, you're a Brit.
Yes.
Kleenex. Tissue paper? Yeah. They call it Tissues. Kleenex? Okay, people don't do that there. Saran wrap.
Yeah, that's cling film.
Okay, in the States, people often, and it doesn't necessarily have to have the capital L. But yeah, they absolutely would have worn denim. That would have been... Yes.
I'd have thought they'd have said denim or jeans rather than actually specifically naming a brand.
But that was the only brand of them. That was the only brand.
See, I wasn't so clear on the dates or anything else. I wasn't sure if I'd missed it when I was reading the opening parts of the book. I just knew that it was after the Civil War. Okay. That's all I knew.
The American
and as it's
Civil
not
War.
My history, it's a bit more, I think this murky. Is definitely, if you're a history nut and love romance, then the American side of this would be more complicated for you if you're English, I think. I didn't learn about the American Civil War at school. America had already gone bye-bye by that point. So...
Yeah, of course. Now, I'm trying to think my knowledge of the American Civil War is inbred in my bones. So I cannot divorce my knowledge of the American Civil War and what happened in the wake of the American Civil War from this book. So I don't... Does that make sense? Like, I can't look at it from your point of view there. But I can imagine that if I was reading a romance novel set post-English Civil War, that I would be quite confused on some of it. But I'm not sure you actually need that for this book.
There were certain elements of it that I found confusing because there was the whole thing, she's not north or south.
Yes.
She is in the middle, that kind of thing. As far as...
Well, what had happened was...
confusing.
Well, what had happened was West Virginia seceded from Virginia to not secede from the Union. So they had a lot of the hallmarks of a southern state because they had been Virginia until they seceded from Virginia. But the West Virginia they're largely hills, Appalachia, and they didn't have a whole lot in common with the eastern seaboard interests, with the stereotypical Southern power structure. And so you had fewer slaves, you had fewer large farms and things like this, specifically plantations and all that jazz. And it's a misnomer or a misconception to think that all white people in the South owned plantations prior to the American Civil War, because that is simply not true. The vast majority of white Southerners were small farmers, and it sounds like Willow's family owned a series of decent-sized farms. And I can't speak to whether or not they were slaveholders or not, but it's definitely something that people in West Virginia would have faced. Sort of the bias coming from both sides, because the North views West Virginia with suspicion, and then the South, of course, views it as traitorous. And so the people...
See, that was the point that confused me, because that was mentioned a few times, and it was mentioned as the way that her character built and everything else. And I was sitting there thinking, I'm going to need to look all this up, because it detached me a little bit when I didn't understand it.
Your podcast partner is an American historian. You could have just asked me. Just throwing that out there, letting you think about it. This is what I do for a living.
But you can see what I'm. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Not everybody is going to have that resource. They are going to be sitting there going. If they're anything like me, when I read something, if I come across something I don't understand or I've got questions about, the first thing I do is go to Google Encyclopedia to try and find things.
Right. Well, I get it. I do get that. But, and I can see where that would be confusing, I guess. But for me, it wasn't, because I just can't, there's nothing there that, like, I can't take away my understanding and knowledge. That's all I'm saying.
No, that's exactly it. See, that is it's kind of like reading something about something about as an individual, and you have a good knowledge of. I'm trying to think. It's like reading something where someone comments on a specific author and you sit there thinking, oh my God, really? And trying to detach your own knowledge from it, or attach your knowledge to it. And if you're reading something that contains elements that you're unfamiliar with, that is because this isn't fantasy. It's based in a time that really occurred. So there is going to be that element of, oh, I didn't know about that. What is that about? How come that happened? If you are that way inclined, as I am.
No, that's totally fair. So, Ray, you would definitely not recommend this book because Caleb is a jerk.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. I mean, I think that everybody has there are certain characteristics that they are going to find attractive in a dominating alpha, and he is definitely an alpha. But I couldn't eliminate from my head the way he acted in the first half of the book. Even though in the second half things do turn around. He is far more gentle with her. He knows that she's not what he believed her to be, and they end up getting together. However, there is always I felt really awful for Willow when her brother's saying, all right, we're going to go out in the morning and you're going to get married because you've defiled my sister. And it's now she knows his suspicion thing. She's seeing it as he seduced her because he wanted vengeance. It was it really was, because she even calls him Old Testament.
Yeah, and he acknowledges, or he gets to the point where he's like, no, that's not why, that's not what happened, that's not, you know what I mean? But I actually highlighted a section in this book.
So did I, but my Kindle's charging in the kitchen.
Let me see. Okay, so this is 52% in. And his internal thought process. She's far too good for a rounder like Matthew Moran. No sooner had the thought come than it crystallized into a vow within the silence of Caleb's mind. Willow's capacity for courage and loyalty and passion deserved better than a man who seduced and abandoned young girls. At the very least, Willow's deep sensuality deserved better than a man who left her alone for so long she forgot how to kiss. But not how to respond. She hadn't forgotten that. No woman who loved another man could respond like that, so quick, so deep. She'll be mine before he sees her fancy man again. I'll seduce Willow so completely that when he's dead, she'll turn to me instead of mourning a fancy man who isn't worth a single one of her tears. She can't love him. She simply can't. Caleb bent and caught Willow's mouth beneath his own, sealing the silent vow. The kiss was unlike any he'd ever given a woman, tender and yet so deeply passionate. He felt as though he was sinking into Willow, seeping from her very soul. When he finally lifted his head once more, she was trembling. Yeah. So it's like that for me, when I read that, was sort of the moment in his head that it wasn't about, it became for him about Willow. Like he wanted her, but you know what? You're right. at no point does he seem to be willing to give up this notion that he needs to kill Matthew Moran. And that's very Old Testament. You're absolutely right.
But then, as I said, they constantly, he says, and in fact, I think it's mentioned several times, he's called Old Testament. Mm-hmm. He even says, oh, it's an eye for an eye. Mm-hmm. So he hasn't read the New Testament with the turn the other cheek, or he felt that was not the adage he wanted to live by.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to be fair, the Old West was not a place where
you turn the other cheek.
Yeah. It's a good way to get dead. And the Old West was lawless in ways that are very difficult to explain, especially on a quick podcast like this. So let's not get too deep into that. But again, Caleb is definitely a romanticized version of a very alpha male, but and he is deeply Old Testament. But I think I'm kinder to him, one, because I think I didn't read it on the heels of an extraordinarily bad book, and you
didn't read it all in one go either.
I didn't read it all in one go, and so I'm really leaning into, like, I think I picked it up at like 42% or something like that. So I'm really leaning into the second half of this book, whereas you still had a bad taste from that other book in that first half, and he's even a jerk some in the second half too. So I mean, I totally get your point. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying my view of him is a little bit less harsh. Yeah. and
he's not the sort of guy I that's the problem. I think every girl likes a bad boy at some point in their lives. He's not bad, though.
He's not bad. That's the thing. Like, when I say he's not bad, like, I guess I'm thinking like Motorcycle Outlaw, which doesn't exist at this point, but he's not an outlaw. He's not an outlaw. That's what I'm saying.
But he's earned his reputation as a gunfighter.
Okay, now we're going to be digging into Western stereotypes and tropes, so please don't make me do it. Please don't make me do it, because I'm going to have to talk about gunfighters and lawless, and please don't make me do it. Please don't make me do it. No. Don't make me. I don't want to. No. Don't make me do it.
But there are several points in the book where his friend Wolf, in fact, he's both Matt's and his friend, says, you're both going to end up dead. Mm-hmm. If they fight each other, because they're of equal skill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. But he's not telling Wolf why he wants to kill Matt Moran. Matt Moran's like, I don't know why he wants to kill me. And because he wouldn't, right? He's not going to share his sister's shame. Right? And we can look at that and go, oh my God, how stupid.
But he does share his sister's shame with Matt. Even after Matt says, well, that definitely wasn't me.
Right. But he shares it because never mind, he's explaining it. But anyway, he's explaining it then. But he is, and this maybe is Elizabeth Lowell trying to show growth in that character, right?
Yeah.
And maybe she could have done it better. But he does become a better man by the end of this book. And he becomes a better man by the end of this book because of the love of Willow. Like, she's not trying to change him, but her love just unleashes the better man within. And that might be Lowell trying to do that. I'm just throwing that out there. I'm just throwing that out there. It's a female power fantasy. It is.
Yeah, I wouldn't dispute that.
So, yeah. All right, well, we've been talking for 34 minutes.
Wow.
So, we should probably call it a night, or a day, rather. So, any last-minute thoughts on this?
This is the first in a series.
Mm-hmm. I have read the rest of the series, by the way.
You have?
I have.
I'm confused as to who it can follow. I'm guessing it follows her brothers, but I have no idea.
It follows Matt. It follows Wolf Lone Tree. It follows her other brother, Whip. And then it goes into some other people who are being attacked by the Culpeper gang, and I don't remember who they are, but the titles change in...
Yeah, according to this, there's only his... Mm-hmm. Well, I'm looking at the historical romance stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And books in the Only series
mm-hmm.
are Only His, Only Mine, Only You, and Only Love.
Mm-hmm.
All of which were reissued in 2003.
Mm-hmm. And I read them, I want to say I read these books in 1997. So, yeah. But I am not a big fan of Westerns. I'm just not. Never have been and never will be. And I think these stuck in my head because they were decent Westerns for me. I don't like Westerns.
Because they were... Is this because they were more factually written?
Mostly
focused?
Because of the... it's not a time period or place in U.S. history that I love a lot. One, and two, there's a lot of racism in them. Whether it's...
intentional or not.
Yeah, and I don't love that. Because... what Americans did to the Native Americans is so shockingly horrifying that I have a really hard time moving around that in my head to get to the plot. So, yeah, to get to romance.
So you do read a book in the same way as I do, in that you can't help focusing on certain elements that are going on around the story.
Sometimes, yes. And I am of a mindset that the way that America has treated Native Americans is so bad that I have a real hard time getting over it.
But this is not a political. But this isn't a political broadcast.
No, it's not. But it's not. But I really have a hard time with it. So, yeah. And it's historic, so I wasn't really thinking of that in a political sense. But anyway, it's a thing for me. That's all. You can't divorce who you are from what you read.
No, of course you can't. And as far as chili ratings go,
most of the stuff is in the back half of the book, right?
It is.
I'd probably go 6, 7-ish.
There are weird references to trout fishing.
Yes.
I kept on reading reviews on Goodreads, and they were mentioning trout fishing and how they could never look at it the same. And this was before I'd got to that part of the book. Uh-huh. And all I could think was, huh? Yeah. Now I get it. However, I still sort of think, huh?
It's an odd
choice.
An odd choice. Yeah, it's an odd choice. So I go 6, 7. I don't know, where are you thinking?
I'm thinking maybe 6, mostly because of my discomfort with
trouts.
The turnaround. Oh, please don't make me laugh too much. It makes me cough.
So 6.5.
Yeah.
6.5. We're settling 6.5 for our chili pepper rating. In other words, don't let your 13-year-old read this book.
Oh, God, no.
Don't let your 13-year-old read this book. Okay. What are we reading next, Ray?
We are reading, in commemoration of Joanna Lindsay, who was like the epitome of bodice ripper authors, we are reading Gentle Rogue, which is the first of her eponymous Mallory series. It's actually one of my favourites in the series.
Okay. And which Mallory hero is this? Which version of Fabio is this?
This is the oldest brother, and I can never remember his name, and I can't find the book on my shelf right at the moment, but it's not Anthony.
I liked Anthony. Yes, so did I. Anthony was my favorite, I think. But okay, Gentle Rogue it is. Yes, all right, y'all. Where can people find you?
People can find me at All About Ray on Twitter, and All About Ray on Goodreads, and allaboutray.wordpress.com. So everything's All About Ray. this year I decided to make everything incredibly cohesive because it started getting very confusing, not only for everyone else, but also for me when I was trying to remember passwords.
Fair enough.
And what about you?
If you want to find me, you can look me up on Twitter and on Instagram as Palmetto Blue. And be prepared for lots of Star Wars talk and or fiber crafting talk, depending on which platform you are looking at. You can find our podcast at ISN Romance on Twitter. And obviously, you can also email the pod if you need to talk to us. Yes?
Yeah, and that is romancenotdeceased@gmail.com. We're also on Facebook at ISN Romance, and we are romancenotdead.wordpress.com. We are going to start updating that blog again very, very soon. And I'm trying to think if there's anywhere else. Oh, yes, of course. And the podcast itself.
Who knew?
romancenotdead.podbean.com.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, y'all. Well, Ray, how would you like to sign out?
Keep on searching for your happily ever after.
And I would remind you that romance isn't dead, even in the Wild West. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.